all this joy, all this sorrow, all this promise, all this pain. Such is life, such is being, such is spirit, such is love. The human being is a surprisingly resilient organism. Your spirit, as surely as your body, will try to heal. So you should not fear tragedy and suffering. Like love, they make you more a part of the human family. From them can come your greatest creativity. They are the fire that burns you pure. I read this quote by Kent Nurburn in the midst of debilitating pelvic pain about 8 years ago. And I thought, maybe there's more than just suffering and loss here. Maybe there's also a chance to grow. Early in my illness, I came across another quote, this one by the cardiologist Dean Ornish, which would eventually summarize my experience. Curing is when the physical disease gets measurably better, and healing is a process of becoming a whole. Even the words heal, whole, and holy come from the same root. In the process of healing, you reach a place of wholeness and deep inner peace, from which you can deal with illness with much less fear and suffering and much greater clarity and compassion. While curing is wonderful when it occurs, healing's often more meaningful because it takes you to a greater place of greater freedom from suffering. So I experienced both healing and curing, and now I'm pain-free without medications, and areas of my body that have been pulled up tight for a lifetime are now relaxed most of the time. But I've come to appreciate that healing is way more than attaining a perfect body or a pain-free body. Healing can happen even when physical issues don't resolve. And I've even seen people who are healing while they were dying. So if you haven't experienced much pain or trauma in your life, you may be wondering if this message today is for you. So let me clarify. Pain is pain. When you are hurting physically or emotionally, regardless of the level, it is very real for you. So healing's not about looking around and comparing. It's simply letting the hurt human inside of each of us speak, so we can release what we are carrying and we can become more free. So in this service, we will consider our responses to the large and the small traumas in our lives, and we will consider ways we can use these challenges to heal on all levels. I'd like to thank Reverend Sean for inviting me to speak today, and Dar and Beth for all their efforts to develop this service. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today. To continue our exploration of healing and post-traumatic growth, I'd like to share some of my personal experiences with you today in this sermon. 8 years ago, I was teaching at a university and taking care of my husband and 2 teenagers, and it was the day before our long-awaited bus tour of Europe when I started to hurt. It felt like I had an extremely full bladder and somebody was sitting on my stomach. My pelvic floor muscles went into knots and my nervous system felt like it was ramped up and in overdrive. I learned that nothing rivals bladder pain, and even at very low levels, it instigated a primal kind of panic. I was diagnosed eventually with interstitial cystitis and pelvic floor dysfunction, And when physicians were recently asked to rate the top 10 most painful conditions that their patients endured, my condition was number 3 on the list. When the pain began, I was Western medicine focused, and I never thought about the mind-body connection or spirituality. In fact, I just thought we were playing out the patterns of our inherited biology, and that everything was related to my genetics. But then, over the years, I had many direct and tangible experiences of the mind-body-spirit connection that I couldn't explain away. And with each experience, my perspective expanded just a little bit and a little bit more, and it eventually led me down many healing paths, and it changed my internal and external life in amazing and positive ways. So 2 years ago, I was preparing a sermon about my healing for my church, which is the UU Church in Long Beach. And I came upon the term post-traumatic growth. And I thought, oh, that kind of is what happened to me. So I looked it up online, and I found out that the term was actually coined by a group of psychologists from the University of North Carolina, and they do study this phenomenon. And Calhoun and Tedeschi were the first people who used this term, post-traumatic growth, in 2006. And they defined it as a positive psychological change that occurs as a result of one's struggle with a highly challenging, stressful, and traumatic event. The researchers state that there are 5 general areas of post-traumatic growth. One is a greater sense of one's own strength. You think, man, if I got through that, I can get through anything. 2, a greater appreciation for life. A sense that new opportunities have emerged from the struggle. A deepening of one's spiritual life, and sometimes this significantly changes one's belief system. And a closer relationship with other people, and especially an increased sense of connection to other people who suffer. So I experienced all of these, but I'd like to share my experiences from the last 2 areas, how this trauma changed my belief system and my increased sense of connection with others. So on to the first point. In September 2007, the pain had been bearing down on me for 2 months. During that time, I traveled throughout Europe. I battled a severe bout of the flu, and I buried my father. Then suddenly, for the first time before the pain began, I was all alone. My husband was on a 2-week business trip in Germany, and I didn't have any support network beyond him at this time in my life. So I would lie in bed in my pain, and the pain would rise higher and higher, and it wouldn't let me sleep. My pulse would be pounding in my ears. And finally, when I would doze off, the pain would wake me up again with an intensity that terrified me. I was handling everything I needed to do for my kids by myself, but the pain was taking its toll. One night, I never wrote beyond my professional duties, ever. But I started to write in the depths of pain. And here's my journal entry from this time. If this is my life, how can I possibly get through it? How many more years until the kids are raised, and how can I make it? If no one loved me, I could check out. But people are counting on me. I'm trying to be positive, trying to find meaning, trying to be grateful. I'm tired. The illness is hidden even to myself. In the mirror, my face looks exhausted, lined, tear-stained, and pained. I feel like I'm trapped in my own personal hell. Can I give the pain to you for just a minute so you can feel the cross I bear? One night after dropping off my daughter at a friend's house, I was stopped at a red light. And as I looked out at the landscape, it was no longer in color. It was just in shades of gray. And I was watching the cars go by, and I was looking at the people walking by, and it seemed like a world that I no longer inhabited. It was superficial. It was unreal. So that same night, I'm resting in bed, and I look up and I see this book on my shelf, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And my brother gave me that book 2 years before, and I had tried to read it then, but I never got past the introduction. Because in the introduction, Eckhart Tolle talks about how he came to the realization that he was more than his body and his mind. So I'm thinking, oh, well, yeah, the guy has major depression, so he has probably learned to decrease the activity in his frontal lobes, and he is activating other parts of his brain, probably maybe the posterior parietal and some subcortical areas. So with this, his new perceptions were neatly categorized and completely suspect, and I put that book right back up on the shelf. So what's kind of funny is, despite this earlier skepticism, on that really dark night, I found myself reading The Power of Now. And the first chapter discusses the idea that we're more than the activity of our minds. And the author invites the reader to tune into this inner dialogue and to recognize that underneath the chatter there is more. Well, I was well aware of this inner dialogue because mine was often incessant and negative. So that night, as I concentrated on moving beneath this, all this talk in my head, I suddenly felt a fullness in my heart, like an electric wave, and it moved from my heart out my arms and out my legs, out my hands, out my feet. And I thought, whoa, that was kind of strange. But the next night, I'm crying in bed again, and I thought about my parents who had now passed. And I thought, hey, if there is any help out there, now would be the time. And I felt that electric thing again come down from the top of my head 5 times, through my full body, out my hands, and out my feet. And it was a very intense experience, and on the 5th time I'm crying and laughing at the same time, and I said, I get it, I'm loved, I get it. So in the past, I would have written off this experience as a neural pathway in overdrive because of the pain. But it was different this time, and I'm not sure why. But I just knew that even if my body were consumed with pain and illness, and even if I suffered from major depression, there was a deeper part of me that's not gonna die. And in that moment, I knew that when I had nowhere else to turn, there was actually more within. So a week later, I'm sitting in the whirlpool at the gym, and as usual, the topic is everybody's aches and pains. I don't know if you guys have sat in a whirlpool in a gym, but most likely that has been the conversation. And so Myra told me that she had fibromyalgia for 3 years and that she was bedridden for 2. But in the last year, she was rallying and she was getting her life back. As we walked into the locker room, she leaned over to me and she said, you know, I rely on my connection with God to give me strength. Well, at that time, the idea of God did not resonate with me, but I did confide with her what had happened to me on that dark night. And she said, that was the grace of God. So that night, I'm reading that Eckhart Tolle book again, and I have to smile because I read this. Awakening is a shift in consciousness in which thinking and awareness separate. The initiation of the awakening process is an act of grace. So a few months later, I read something written by Deepak Chopra that also helped me accept this experience. He described how reality is determined in part by our ability to perceive and process sensory information, so that reality isn't fully a static thing. Throughout history, our view of reality has changed whenever we've enhanced our sensory capabilities. For example, before the invention of microscopes or Geiger counters, cells and radiation were unknown to us, but they were always there. After my experiences that night, I was more open to the possibility that there was more to this world than I could pick up with my 5 senses, and more to me than I had previously considered. On a walk in my neighborhood, my husband and I every night would walk in the neighborhood. And one night I was walking and I said, "Whoa, the stars are really out tonight." And then I thought that, oh, that's kind of a silly statement because the stars are always out, even in the light of day. But now that conditions had changed, I could perceive them. So what happened to me on that night might have been a little bit like stargazing, because maybe it was really, really dark, I could see more. I can now appreciate that this shift in awareness was crucial for me, and it's when my healing journey began. Now I'd just like to share a few stories about how post-traumatic growth can change how we connect with other people. During my, when I was going through the pelvic pain, I started to realize that before my illness, my circle of compassion never included people with depression or pelvic pain. Right before the pain began, a woman came up to me in the gym locker room and she was telling me about her battle with depression. And I made a mental note to avoid intense conversation with her in the future. And then in the 80s, I was a new physical therapist and I was on an airplane, and someone heard that I was a therapist, so they popped their head up over the seats in front of me and started to talk to me about fibromyalgia. And I tried to look interested, but I wasn't really listening. And I thought, oh, this person just probably has some psychological defect, and that's caused their pain. And when therapists would tell me that they were working with people with chronic pain or pelvic pain, I would think and sometimes even say, I don't know how you can do that. Because for me, those people and their problems seemed so separate from me and a little beneath me too. Now I understand that I was shut off from these people because I was really shut off from these aspects of myself. And in some ways, these people were a mirror, and they were reflecting back to me what I didn't want to look at. So that's a little bit humbling, I tell you. So as I worked through the pain, I started feeling a stronger bond of shared humanity, especially with those people who were hurting. 4 years ago, I was sitting in yet another whirlpool when a 20-year-old guy sat next to me, and down his arm was this really horrific-looking tattoo. It looked like death itself. And I said to him, I go, I feel just like your tattoo today. And he said, I feel like it every day. And then he looked at me really cautiously, and I saw these big brown eyes just brimming with pain. We talked for 45 minutes about our experiences with physical and emotional pain. I'm walking out of the jacuzzi, you know, my 54-year-old body, 52 at the time, walking out of the jacuzzi, looked down at him and I said, dude, I hope that wasn't too much information for you. And he said, I've given him a lot to think about, and he thanked me. After thanking him, I said, you know, it's really weird. The last 4 times I've been in this jacuzzi, I have met somebody that shares at this deep level. And he said, that's no coincidence. You opened up and you asked about my pain. We all have pain, but nobody ever talks about it. You know, before I developed the chronic pelvic pain, I thought I was the only one who was hurting because many people suffer in silence or they don't even have an awareness of what they are carrying. Just like the kids say, many people go around really angry when underneath it, they are really scared and they are carrying a lot of stuff. So now I realize that I'm not alone, and suffering, just like joy, is an integral part of the human condition. The researchers found that people who experience post-traumatic growth look at what they're carrying emotionally and they take time to process it. Well, I definitely didn't want to do that. And it took me 2 years of being in intense pain before I would admit that maybe, just maybe, there might be an emotional component to my illness. But eventually I looked, and with a lot of help. Over the years, I realized I had shut down the emotional, intuitive, and sexual sides of me, and I worked to open back up. And this might be hard to hear, but 5 years into my illness, I had the gift of knowing how it all began. When memories of being raped by the priest who was the hero of my childhood surfaced, and I knew all the details that happened at age 4, 5, and 9. These new memories were really hard to accept, but my siblings completely validated them. They matched the memories I kept, and they matched the job of the priest. And his job was to protect the pedophiles so that they would not, to keep them away from children so they would not harm anyone else. So now, much of my life made sense. I knew why the pain landed in my pelvic area, and I knew why my pain began the week my dad died. Because now that both of my parents were gone, there was a part of me that was ready to start looking and start processing. So for me, pain was not just a sign that my body was breaking down. It was a signal. Hey, Mary Ruth, you haven't looked for a lifetime. It is time to look, to process, and to heal. So I had to walk through the dark, and I discovered the underlying shame, fear, rage, and blame that resided there. But you know what? This was just the tough part of the journey, because healing was actively replacing these constricting emotions with loving self-acceptance. It was discovering the me that experienced the trauma but was no longer defined by it. So with difficult times, there's an opportunity. We can practice being grounded and present. We can release what we don't want to carry. We can limit how much we constrict in fear, and we can allow more love and light to flow through us. And if you'd like a little reminder of all these aspects of healing, it's what the kids did today. They became more grounded. They shook off what they no longer served them. They thought about love and light moving through them. And when they were able to do that, they could shine it out to the rest of the world. During a pain flare-up about 4 years into the healing, 3 words kept popping into my head from an old scripture: faith, hope, and love. So I'm going to close today just with this little reminder for when you may come up on tough times in your life. First, have faith that the suffering may be part of a bigger picture. It may have meaning. Have hope that everything changes in life. Nothing stays the same. Have hope that this too shall pass. And love, use it as an opportunity to love yourself through it and to grow in your ability to treat yourself with compassion. And this might be fierce love. This might be loving yourself when you have energy for nothing else. And it is, for me, it was this love that changed post-traumatic stress into post-traumatic growth. Thank you. It can really shake us up. Sometimes this can feel like a little tremble, and other times like a major earthquake. But with this shaking, the old can crumble and fall away, and light can shine in through these cracks. The more we allow, the more we shake loose, and the more we can rebuild ourselves with bricks of love. When a person gradually releases what he or she doesn't want to carry and becomes more open and loving, it can shift the experiences of people around them. Like a pebble creating ripples on the water, this personal change flows outward and shifts the social dynamics. What is happening on a small level within us is eventually reflected between us at larger and larger levels. It can be difficult to look within. It can be difficult to heal. But rest assured, as you work to heal yourself, you are also working to heal the world. Thank you.